Who was that? Yay. Catherine?
My favorite.
My pages are all out of order now. Okay. Gonna go past all of this. Tra-la-la. Here we go. All right. So I'm going to introduce you to a gal named Ruth, different than the Ruth you thought you knew from the Bible. First of all, the background of Moab is quite brazen, ostentatious. Many of you probably already know this. But just as a reminder for those of you do, built on incest between Lot, while he was passed out drunk, and his daughter who took advantage of him. So it's an incestuous blight on the map. The Jews would have considered Moab to be like big no-no territory. I mean, literally built on incest. From the ancient Moabite stone, now this you may not have already heard. The ancient Moabite stone, there was a leader, King Chemosh, and he channeled or divined or something. I don't really get it. It's weird when you look at what the historical documentation of these kind of ecstasy moments of communication with the pagan gods that he had. But in any case, he was personally, or claimed to be personally in touch with the Moabite god and all these different things. And he knew that the Moabite god could only be appeased through child sacrifice. Now, in 2 Kings 3:27, we actually read about how King Mesha sacrificed his son to this god, to this god Chemosh. And he was channeling things into him directly. This is documented in the ancient Mesha's Moabite stone. King Mesha actually had his Chemosh Mesha Moabite stone document. It's like a cuneiform tablet, except it's giant. And he went on to talk about all of the reasons why he did this, but in addition to this, there was a long history also recorded through some of these forms of documentation that talked about the other people of this city, Moab, whose leaders had long since been sacrificing their children for the sake of the blessing on the town and so on. So not only is it built on incest, I mean, that's how it begins. Then you have child sacrifice, which, again, the biggest affront to Judaism would have been child sacrifice. So that's part of the reason why, if you look at number 3, Deuteronomy 23:3-6, prohibits Moabites from intermingling with Israelites at all. And this is an explanation for why Ruth and Boaz... Oh, I'm sorry. There is an explanation for why Ruth and Boaz are allowed to associate. That is addressed in the book. There's a loophole that they found in the Jewish law that allowed it because she wasn't a man and there wasn't, it wasn't a direct thing. It wasn't about, the offspring of so-and-so. If you read about it in the book, by the way, the book I'm teaching from is volume 1 of The Mystery of Jesus. But there's a reason why they were not prohibited from marrying. But you can imagine, regardless of the fact if they found a loophole, can you imagine if somebody came to you and said, "Mom, I'm getting married. I met a man. He's from this incestuous town, built on this guy who got drunk and then, slept with his daughter. But he doesn't have anything to do with that. Oh, and the king there, he sacrifices children, but she's got to overlook that because this guy's really nice." Probably not going to happen. Not going to get your blessing, right? All right, so this is the child sacrificing, incestuous religion climate that Ruth grew up in. And yet she had her mother-in-law Naomi, and she bravely said, "Thy people shall be thy people, and thy God my God," right? All right, so how many of you guys know where I'm going with this Boaz and Ruth Jesus revelation picture? Yeah? A few of you? Good. Yay, I'm excited. I'm in good company. Boaz had every reason to distrust Ruth. Yet, watch what he does. He blesses her to gather freely from his harvest. He tells her to enjoy the company of other Israelite women at the site. He informs her that he has already instructed the men that she is to be left alone. Listen, women did not get that kind of respect back then. They didn't. They flat out didn't. And if a man like Boaz said, "You men leave her alone," it would have been more than just a little bit of jive teasing. Yeah. Right? They would have assumed and expected all kinds of craziness. And he says to her, "It hath been fully shewed me all that thou hast done unto my mother-in-law," and calls her a virtuous woman. So first I want to ask you, does this remind you of anyone? Sometimes reading an excerpt from a book does actually help, not just with my nerves, although that's a big part of it too, but it helps with the people who can follow along. They learn visually. So I'm gonna read an excerpt here. Excerpt from The Mystery of Jesus, Volume 1. Think about this for a moment. Boaz did not say that she could only have food from his land if she was willing to pay interest, earn her keep, work extra hours, pay him any personal favors, or any other requirement. He didn't ask her about her former husband, her past in Moab, whether she plans to corrupt his other field maidens with pagan ideas, whether her lifestyle was such that she needed to be under supervision while she drank from the same vessels as the men, what hair-raising temple activities that she may have participated in back home. I can tell you this, the Ruth that you see in the Christian coloring books is not the Ruth that would have appeared in Boaz town. I mean, maybe they would have had her dressed more appropriately by then, but when she first became associated with the Jewish lifestyle, when they were on her territory, she would have looked a little bit, I don't know if you've seen the old movie Sodom and Gomorrah, the old one from like the 50s. She would have looked more like that. If she believes in tithing, okay, I'm about to get sarcastic here. If you read my books, you know I get really sarcastic very often. If she believes in tithing, if she attends confession regularly, whether she has memorized her denomination's fundamental statements of faith, whether she had ever smoked a cigarette, if she felt tempted to smoke a cigarette, how she feels about dyeing eggs on Easter, how long she's been a member of her local church and whether she's current on her membership dues, whether she raises her hand during worship on Sundays or whether blonde was her true hair color. Nothing. He doesn't care. He proves it over and over and over again that he doesn't care. And yes, we know that this list is sarcastically anachronistic, which means out of space and time. But our point is made. He didn't even care about her past moral codes or reputation, which was huge in Israel's history. Might we learn something from this story about the way we treat people outside the church today?
Absolutely. Ouch.
Yeah. It is brutally straightforward. She asked him why in the world he would have ever shown her such kindness, acceptance, and grace, and his answer was quite simply because she had shown unconditional love for a woman named Naomi. Now, if you listen real close, you might be able to hear the verse we have in mind straight out of the mouth of Christ, echoing on the end of Boaz's convictions. Listen to this. "Truly I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you have done it unto me." Boaz was a type of Christ. Okay? It's beautiful. But this is nowhere near the best part. So, what is a kinsman redeemer? First of all, did I get ahead of myself?
No.
Okay. So what is a kinsman redeemer? That comes from the Hebrew word goel. And this is one who, among many other things, it's a legal term and it covers a whole bunch of family activity, legal rights, and so on. One who redeems the lost property ownership and passes it on to the younger generation. So if a property owner could not afford his property because it's leveraged mortgaged, and that, by the way, this also includes natural disaster or any kind of thing like that, because they didn't just all have the same kind of property insurance that we have now. The Goel was able to speak with the local patrons, the people who were the high uppity up muckety mucks in the town and the city, and work out some kind of a trade or an intervention to get that property back in livable condition so it can be passed on to the other, to the future generations of the same family. This also did include the women, the children, and the elderly. They were considered property at the time, so they belonged to the home, the land, and so on. So the kinsman redeemer would come in, and they would basically say, look, I know this is a risk. I know that this doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I'm going to buy this for my brother so-and-so. I'm going to take all your elderly, your children, your wives, everything that's on this property, and I'm going to redeem it. Sorry, I'm trying not to get emo because I know where this is going. I am going to redeem it and give back to my family, keeping something in its proper shape, keeping something valuable. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to redeem it like somebody redeems a coupon, right? It was an actual act of redemption. All right, now this is how it was carried out legally. The original terms of sale for the property would be written on a scroll. This was the names of the people who belonged to it, the area of the land, what goes with the land, and so on. The scroll was signed by the property owner, the goel, okay, and the witnesses inside and at the bottom on the outside, then rolled up and sealed. So if this is your scroll, you have your witnesses sign on the outside in one corner, and on the inside on the document in the areas where all of the details of the contract are being written. Then they roll it up on the outside so that the outside witnesses' signatures are right here, and then it's sealed shut. And there is only one person, okay, that is allowed to open that scroll. So the scroll was signed by the property owner, the goel. I already said that. Part 3. The goel or kinsman redeemer, whose name was signed at the bottom outside of the scroll, was the only one with the legal right to break the seal, open the original contract, view the terms of sale and ownership, and its inhabitants, wife, kids, elderly, and so on, within the family to restore it to its rightful owner. If you look at Revelation chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, we view the scroll that holds the terms for our salvation. And I, John, saw in the right hand of him, God, that sat on the throne a scroll written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. This is literally Goel terminology. Literally. Straight out of the book of Ruth, straight out of the Old Testament, where they talk about the legal documents and how they work, all throughout Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and so forth. And I saw a scroll, okay, line 2, sat on this throne with a scroll written within and on the backside, sealed with the 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose the seals thereof?" And no man in heaven nor in earth, neither under the earth, was able to open the scroll, neither to look thereon. And I wept much, because no man was found worthy to open and to read the scroll, neither to look thereon. We'll look at another powerful excerpt here. Prior to Christ, there was no person in history that could ever be worthy to redeem humanity. Nor has any human person ever been kinsman to God. In Boaz terms, we were living on a property with no owner, doomed to wander the earth forever, as, quote, no man in heaven nor in earth, neither under the earth, would be able to open the scroll, representing the property where we resided. Guys, that's earth. That's the property where we reside. And consider any kind of repurchase, redemption, or resale of our spiritual conditions to another caretaker who would see to our provision. It is heart-wrenching to see John in this passage weeping at what scholars say represented the damnation of a forgotten humankind with no promise or no future. These authors would have wept too. That's me and Tom and Allie. What a sad, tragic end for all of us. But in the very next verses, we are introduced to the utmost kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ. Watch what happens here. Revelation 5 through 10, the scroll that holds the term of our salvation. And one of the elders, one of the witnesses present at the time that this scroll was sealed, and therefore one of the only ones who knew what was stated inside, you see that? See that word picture? Saith unto me, weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the scroll and to loose the 7 seals thereof. And I beheld, in the midst of the elders, the witnesses, stood a lamb, Jesus, as it had been slain. And he came and he took the scroll out of the right hand of God, who sat upon the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the elders fell down before the Lamb, and they sung a new song, saying, Thou, we found him, Thou art worthy to take the scroll and to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain and hast redeemed us to God by the blood out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation, and hast made us unto our God kings and priests, and we will reign on the earth. Dude, it's one thing. If Jesus would have been so kind just to save us all, that'd have been enough, right? Kings, priests, we're royalty? Again, I say, dude, that is a very complicated theological term. And it means my brain is exploding at the concept. What follows is a sad scene of praise. What follows is a scene of praise wherein, not sad. No, I have a handwritten note to myself saying something was sad, and I looked at it real quick. What follows is a happy scene of praise wherein every living creature, both in heaven and on earth, worshiped the Lamb, who was the only kinsman of humankind with the right to break the seals on the scroll of our planet's fate. The only Lamb whose spilt blood was the currency, by the way, for the repurchase of the land to begin with and its otherwise lost inhabitants. Jesus, the only entity in the universe who is literally kinsman both to humanity and to God, was willing to take the burden of our fate into his hands, loose the otherwise unloosable 7 seals, and unroll the details of our contract for all to see and for all to inherit freely. Christ was our relative. Without his blood-bought purchase, our destiny would be no more glorious than to remain spiritually lethargic while we wandered the damned corners of the earth, belonging to no one other than the prince of the power of the air and awaiting death and judgment. Boaz's gentle, loving interactions to Ruth never once, required her to account for the pagan, child-sacrificing, incestuous religious worldview that she was raised in, as he simply redeemed her in front of witnesses and elders, making nothing of her life before but a distant and irrelevant memory as he bought her and brought her into new life and new promises. It would be into his loving arms that she would remain forever and never look back. Look at this. Never look back to what the world tried to make of her. Now look at how Jesus fulfills this. Jesus' gentle, loving interactions with the human race never once requires that we live in bondage over past baggage or sin. No matter how grievous our wages of sin and death, new life awaits all inhabitants of this property, earth. And Jesus submitted himself to the cross, paying the price for the redemption of the contract in blood, without a single person being required to first stand an account for who we were and what we were doing before we found him. In front of the heavenly elders, Jesus tore open that scroll and he redeemed us all on the spot. We are truly the blood-bought, the church, the redeemed. New life, new promises, and it is into the loving arms of Jesus and the Father that we fall into, accepting this generous and gracious gift we could have never earned, by the way, we could have never deserved, while we never look back to what the world tried to make of us. Behold, you guys, this is the Christ of Ruth. We've covered Ruth. Jesus is in every one of the 66 books of the Bible. He's foreshadowed, he's spoken of, he is glorified, and he's coming back. And I just covered one book. And by the way, it's one of the shortest books in the entire Bible. Ruth, 4 more chapters. Boom! Behold, the Christ of Ruth. Do you see what we miss when we skim right past the details? Jesus is in the details. And he's in there over 66 times, but at least 66 times. The Bible looks forward to exactly what he's going to be. No, so here's how to wrap up Ruth, right? Here's the geology. Ruth and Boaz had Obed. Obed had Jesse. Jesse had David. The David, of course, the greatest king of Israel, through whom the Messiah, the son of David, was promised. The very one who would later carry out his own Boaz story of redemption for all of mankind. You can't make this up. You see what I'm saying? It takes more faith not to believe, you guys. I talk to skeptics and atheists all the time. I hear them, I see them on TikToks, YouTubes. I see them saying, well, if God is here, then, and then they start the list. And I'm telling you, they are listening to their side of the argument. It takes one look at one book, and you're like, you can't come up with that on your own. A human imagination cannot put that together. So be faith strengthened this weekend, right? Yeah. Now, again, actually, you know what? Do I have time to go there?
Yeah. Go there.
Mama?
Go.
All right.
Go for it.
Anybody read Ecclesiastes and feel that it's a little pessimistic? Yeah? Has anybody in here already heard my spiel on Ecclesiastes?
No.
Really?
Come on.
What?
Maybe.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I like it. Told my dad when I was little, he's like, you never know, you might grow up and be a woman preacher. And I was like, Dad, well, women can't be a preacher. Why do you say that? Well, and I repeated something about something Paul said, didn't know a thing about it. He goes, what if you did it anyway? Wouldn't it be fun? And I said, I don't really see it. I don't really care about it. I don't really think that's what I'm ever going to do. And then about 10 years ago, he says, oh, I got to tell you the story about what happened when I went to Arizona with Allie. I'll make it quick. My dad tells me, he says, I don't know why I'm sending you to Arizona. You and Allie, I have no clue, didn't he, Allie? No clue.
And he said it for days.
For days. Don't know why I'm sending you there. There's some girly conference thing, I don't know. You're going to go there, they'll probably give away free lipstick or a purse or something. It's going to cost me much more money than I ever wanted to spend to send you to Arizona, but something's going to happen there. I'm not going to say what happened with Allie. She had her own testimony confirming that she was exactly who she thought she was supposed to be, which was cool because...
Misfits. It's in there.
Oh, yeah, it's in Misfits. But anyway, so he tells me that I'm going to go there and he doesn't know what I'm supposed to get there. And I go to this conference and I'm just attending. I'm not teaching or doing anything. And they said, if you are a millennial by this date to this date birthday, I want you to stand up. Of course, I met the cutoff by 2 months. And so I was like, I'm a millennial, so I'm supposed to stand up. And then they said, we're going to have all of the women that are around these young millennials lay hands on them. And I was like, please, no. Because you got to understand, I grew up Pentecostal, and I believe in supernatural power. I believe in miracles. I am truly, by doctrine, a Pentecostal, but I have seen the weird Pentecostal too, a little bit. And so you've seen the kind of the stuff that happens when you're... It's just a bit of a turn off, and I was like, oh no, I don't know these people, and I'm going to have hands all over me, and I was really nervous. I cannot explain what happened. It was a supernatural thing. I have yet to be able to explain this. But I'm standing there. Okay. Hands on me. From everywhere. Oh! They put it there too. Yeah, good. God bless you too. Not in my comfort zone. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this woman who was preaching, She said, "You've called these millennials into a purpose, and I pray that you would reveal that on the count of 3. And again, you have to understand, because I grew up the way that I did, I'm waiting for the 3 so that the hands will go off. I wasn't waiting for the 3 because I thought anything else was coming. And she said 3, and there was no pain, but my jaw right here set on fire. Not literal fire with flames, but like it burned. There was a burning sensation on my jaw. And it's so weird to explain because it was on fire, but there was no pain. It was just hot. Really, really hot. And this other woman who was standing here, which over the weekend, you could come up with all different kinds of wonderful and colorful things to say about this lady, but she had her hand on me, and she jerked it off, and she went, "Whoa!" really loud.
Ellie.
I apologize. Okay.
Still there.
Anyway, that was the testimony, and I came home and I told my dad about that, and he said, "I knew it and I confirm it. You're supposed to be a preacher, a teacher, or something. You're supposed to do this."
Open your mouth.
And anyway, since then I finally stopped telling him all the reasons why I couldn't do the very thing that I'm doing now. But I'm still not there yet. You get me? Like, I've been doing this 10 years now, and I'm still standing up here sweating bullets and being nervous. But do it afraid, right? Wait till you hear what I'm going to preach on Sunday morning. No excuse to saying no to God, even it doesn't matter whether or not you're comfortable with it. So, let me get back to this. I'm gonna tell you a couple of things about Ecclesiastes you probably didn't know. Yay, it still works. So, when we often think of Ecclesiastes, it's overwhelmingly negative or pessimistic. It tears down everything we think is good by calling it vanity and meaningless, while stating that every endeavor is a mere chasing after the wind, right? And after all of its bad news, it ends up with the trite, "Do what God tells you to do" directive, leaving us feeling like there's nothing left in life to enjoy or find beautiful. But we still have to obey a bunch of rules along the way because God says so, and follow God. That's the way we think of Ecclesiastes. Okay. It was bugging me because I was doing research in the Mystery of Jesus book, and I was cranking this thing out fast. And I just could not let go of Ecclesiastes. It was bothering me so bad that it was just kind of seemed to be really negative. And there was a couple of moments in there too where he's like, "Yeah, we do this, that, and the other thing, and in the end we die, but love God." And it just didn't seem like it fit the theme of the life-giving scripture to me. But I knew that there had to be an explanation for that. So I went through my Logos Bible software. I contacted every single professor at Global University and 2 or 3 of the other universities that they've got friends with. And I just kind of started the chain. Who can explain this to me? And I'll be darned if I didn't find it in the weirdest place. Okay. Pessimism literature was an actual literary form. It was a device. And here's why you haven't heard of this yet. It was only used by kings. Much in the way that today a U.S. president would give a State of the Union address. You're not going to get a State of the Union address if you go to Walmart or a conference. A State of the Union address comes specifically to from the president to his people, acknowledging all the things that stink that they want to see fixed. And then he follows it up by giving whatever his plan is. I won't go into politics, but some of them are not the greatest plans, right? Okay. Pessimism literature, also known as pessimistic philosophy. It was a form of literature, a literary device is the technical term for that, and it is now extinct across the globe. But it was familiar in the ancient Near East, tracing back to at least 2000 BC. Antique Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts have several examples. I've read them. They sound like Ecclesiastes, such as the good fortune of the dead, a dispute over suicide, and the satire on the trades, and so on. Only kings, pharaohs, or rulers of large regions would write these letters or books, much like a State of the Union address to Westerners today. So, the purpose of pessimism literature This is fascinating. They explored the unanswered questions of life and acknowledged/sympathized with the pain of their people. This meant that they had to be transparent about every hardship or justice. So far, this is sounding familiar because Ecclesiastes is a bunch of hardships and injustice. So this is what they did. They'd get close to the end of their letter. So they'd start their letter. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're going through this thing that stinks and this thing that hurts and that thing that's really bothering you and this. They go down a long, long list. And at the end, they blame the failure of all of these things on the pagan gods that have failed them. That's what they would do. So you're sick because the god or goddess, whatever pantheon, Egyptian pantheon, Greco-Roman pantheon, whatever, Mesopotamian ancient gods, they're literally so ancient we don't have any specific pantheon to assign them to. Whatever the pagan god that failed, you're sick because that goddess let you down. You're sick because that god let you down. You lost your property in a fire because this god let you down. The famine happened because the god of plenty over here didn't do what he said he was going to do. Yes, I know. You ran around that idol and you cut yourself and you did the rain dance and it still didn't work. It's his fault, right? That's what they would do. Through the process, they attempted to find answers to the social and political problems that confronted their subjects' daily lives to position themselves as heroes. So the pharaoh or their king would get to the end and say, your gods failed you, but I won't. I've got a plan. Now listen to this. This is irony at its finest. But negativity, doubt, and cynicism was the framework within which a positive result could be produced. Okay, you can't fix a problem until you admit you have a problem. So you've got to use the framework of negativity, doubt, and cynicism in order to produce a positive result or answer. So there is a reason why Solomon's book differs from the secular pessimism literature of that day. Because instead of saying, your gods failed you and I'm not going to, he goes to a completely different and very surprising ending. After admitting all of the trifling details of life, he says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God, not us, not Solomon, shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Okay, instead of blaming God, Solomon actually acknowledged the pain of his people and said that God was the answer to everything. So God is the hero of the State of the Union address. That's what he did. But this one moment that I don't want you to miss is the sole duty of man. That would not have been lost on his readers during that day. We read it and we go, okay, that's the sole duty of man. What next? But during that day, his readers would have been waiting for the big da-da-da-dawn of the State of the Union address. They would have been getting to the end of the letter and saying, okay, which God am I going to have to worship? How am I going to have to cut myself? Who am I going to have to sleep with? Excuse me, I'm sorry, but it depends on the pagan gods you're following. Who am I going to have to sacrifice? What am I going to have to lose? How am I going to gain the favor of XYZ pagan god? He gets to the end of his letter and he goes, the sole duty of man, i.e., that's all you have to do. It's a positive letter if there ever was one. I'm going to give you an example as to how he took this journey real quick. Abraham was instructed by God to sacrifice the promised child, Isaac, right? But just before Abraham carried out the deed, a ram was provided in the thicket for sacrifice, proving that God had never intended Abraham to perform the human sacrifice to please him to begin with. You guys don't forget that Abraham was from Ur. Okay, this ancient Chaldean part of the world, child sacrifice was commonplace. So for Abraham, he was going into this relationship with God, and when God said, take your son up a mountain and kill him, he went, oh, well, that stinks because it's the promised child, but God must know what he's doing. Let's go do it. Now, it does say in the book of Hebrews that he made it to the heroic hall of fame because he believed that God would raise the son. Okay, that's there too. But understand that we get, as Christians, I know I did until I understood it, we get nervous and uncomfortable when we hear that God told someone to sacrifice their son, their human child. And there's a part of us when we're first getting to know God that we're like, I see that you provided the ram in the thicket. Thank you for doing that, but why did you even go there? Why did you even use that language? It's so evil. Here's why. God had to illustrate it in a way that it would never be forgotten, right? He had to let Abraham climb that mountain all the way up, thinking he knew what gods were like. So that when he got up there, God could, in that moment, provide a ram and put the holy smackdown on human sacrifice forever, in a way that was illustrative. He wouldn't forget it because God had led him all the way up the mountain to see how this was going to be illustrated. And I have a note to myself here. God could have simply instructed Abraham to sacrifice the ram in the first place, but his divine will would not have been shown. Not just told, but shown. And future generations would have, as they did, slipped back into pagan practices. We could have seen a moment in time where the future Jewish line actually did go back into child sacrifice. Part of the reason why we didn't is because of the holy smackdown laid on the mountain that day. It was illustrative. God made it clear. It was an almighty smackdown on the very concept. So the comparison here between Abraham and Isaac and Ecclesiastes, just to help you kind of understand. In the case of Abraham and Isaac, God never intended Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. In the case of Ecclesiastes, Solomon never intended Ecclesiastes to promote pessimism. In the case of Abraham and Isaac, Abraham was from Ur, child sacrifice was normal, and an illustrative lesson was needed. In the case of Ecclesiastes, the Israelites grumbled. Grumbling was normal. If you don't believe me, read the New Testament or the Old Testament. An illustrative lesson was needed. All right, in the case of Abraham and Isaac, God uses the mountain of sacrifice journey to put the holy smackdown on human sacrifice and introduce a blood substitute, the ram, in a way that it would stick with Abraham and his descendants forever. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon used the mountain of pessimism to put the holy smackdown. Okay, he took his readers on the same journey here. To put the holy smackdown on the grumbling of Israel and introduce the positive, optimistic truth that God is the answer in a way that would stick with his readers and their descendants forever. So just because we have lost the concept of pessimistic literature does not mean that we need to completely lose. The bottom line was not this crappy thing, this stinky thing happens, and that stinky thing happens over there, and everything just gets stinkier and stinkier, and in the end we die. Oh, and by the way, we're not really any more important than the animals. That's not Ecclesiastes. He was saying, folks, listen to me. I know, I've heard your grumbling. You complain about this. You complain about that. You complain about this. He was writing down the things that had been taken to his courtroom. And he gets to the end and he says, the whole duty of man is just love God. That's it. Don't have to cut yourself. Don't have to burn your neighbor's field. Just love God. That's it. Like, it's so positive. Scholars say that Solomon's whole goal in following the tradition of the pessimism literature of his day was to produce a holy counterpart to Israel's secular pagan neighbors. Its work was, look at this, quote, a reply to the unrelieved pessimism of much ancient thought. Therefore, we say in Volume 1, Ecclesiastes was written to dispute and to defy the hopelessness of those who adhered to the pagan religions. If all of life in the absence of God is meaningless vanity and a chasing after the wind, then the presence of God results in an antinomous treatment of everything that the book says as a whole. God is the meaning of it all, exceedingly valuable and worth every effort that we can put in to the chase toward him. Now, if that was true in Solomon's day, how much truer is it today, since Jesus was the blood sacrifice once and for all? Amen. So you look at everything that Ecclesiastes says. It's hard to see Jesus in Ecclesiastes until you see what Solomon was actually doing when he wrote that. When you see how he wrote it, what he wrote, and his bottom line, then you look at what that means today and you go, oh my gosh, Jesus changed the entire thing. Everything in Ecclesiastes is the opposite of what you thought that it was saying. And I'm telling you what, if I lost anybody by the book, I'm telling you, I'm not up here to sell you a book, but the book breaks it down and it shows you how Jesus becomes the fulfillment of every longing in the human heart. Now, Jesus in the wisdom books, just to give you a quick nutshell of how he appears and everything else, he was the mediator of justice that Job couldn't see, the hope and the answer that the psalmists looked forward to, the perfected wisdom that Proverbs anticipated, the meaning of life that Ecclesiastes projected, the love of God that the Song of Solomon reflected, and so much more. Jesus is in every single one of all the 66 books of the Bible, and it goes so much more beyond what I can even cover here in this presentation. So I hope that was a happy little introduction to your weekend. I'm going to turn it